everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in for our updates. This half year has flown by, but we've been focusing on some really exciting ME/CFS research, and we think will be some good publications in the second half of this year. In particular, we've been interested in focusing on the mechanism of ME/CFS research. So many of you may not know, though you may have heard some of our theories about what causes ME/CFS. Probably most notably, people may recall previous discussions around the nitrogen hypothesis that we've talked about, or other people have talked about, presentations that we've made in this subject. And so that's kind of the origin for a lot of this work. And that's really based on the idea that amino acids are a substrate that we can use for energy production. And so all of us can utilize this substrate. And it's particularly under stress conditions that we will utilize more amino acids for energy production. We also use lipids in stressful conditions for energy production, so fats. And generally, the priority for at rest and in a healthy, good state is to utilize sugars, glycolysis for energy production. All three are often utilized, but it's the proportions in which they are utilized, which is important. And what we've identified within our ongoing research is that ME/CFS patients seem to be utilizing amino acids more rapidly than the other two, at least in our research that we've looked at. And this is backed up by a number of studies. And even in our early metabolomics research, we identified that nitrogen as an atom, which is what is unique to amino acids, what separates it from sugars and fats is it has these things called nitrogen atoms in them. That atom is what provides the structure of amino acids. That's why all enzymes and proteins and muscles are all kind of made of amino acids. But itself, when you're actually utilizing amino acids for energy production, you have to release that nitrogen because you're utilizing the carbons of fats, sugars, and amino acids. So the nitrogen has to be released. And that nitrogen release can kind of come in different forms. It could come in the form of like nitric oxide, or it could come in the form of ammonia. But this would be happening, I guess, within the cell itself, not something we would expect really to build up to ridiculous like levels in the blood, which you may correlate with something like a liver disease, right? But that's something that's not what we're talking about here. What is important, though, is that the use of amino acids for energy production, for us, it's not just this buildup of potential problems within cells. It's also the fact that amino acids are very useful for all sorts of different parts of the body, especially for like collagen synthesis, digestive enzymes, purine production. So purines are like the backbone of ATP, but also nucleotides, and also really important for neurotransmission. So we have quite a bit of important roles that amino acids play outside of just for being able to utilize for energy production. And we're particularly interested in all the different ways that if you were to have increased use of amino acids for ATP production or energy production, the other roles that amino acids would have would be taken away or reduced. And so problems in those areas are things that we've been looking at, but also upstream, what would cause amino acids to be utilized for energy production like this? Why is this happening for patients? Why are they looking at this? So on one hand, we think the way that amino acids are being utilized in this ongoing state could be enough to explain the disease, or at least a choke point where most patients are similar, and then the variation happens because of the other things that are impacted, like genetics and all sort of stuff impacting these patient population. But at the same time, upstream could be caused by genetic issues. Say, for instance, if you were to have issues with utilizing fats for energy production during a stress state, when you would increase your use of amino acids and fats for energy production, if you already had a genetic abnormality or issue with digesting fats, this would then reduce your capacity to utilize fats. So then you would up your increase of amino acids for energy production. And then, but it could also be um, an ongoing stressor as well. So there are a lot of potential things that could be upstream of this. And that's why we think of that hypothesis or this core component as a choke point. And in fact, this hypothesis was the origin of why, Rob Fair and myself started to talk about the atacanate shunt, or even think about the atacanate shunt. So this was the origin of it. Rob and I would discuss this potential hypothesis around amino acids being used for energy and what could be creating it. We eventually landed on this idea that atacanate shunt could be a mechanism that would create this phenomena of amino acids being utilized for energy production. And so both the work with the atacanate shunt and some of the downstream aspects to this hypothesis we're actually going to detail and publish towards the second half of this year. And so that's something to be really excited to see. We've also been looking at some of, as I said, some of the potential issues and genetic abnormalities that may be contributing to this problem, or at least if you did have this problem, why it might present in a specific subset or differently in different subsets of patients themselves. So this is kind of an exciting area for us, and I thought I would bring that as an update today, just to talk about this because it's something that's been on our mind quite a lot recently, and I think it's something to look forward to in the future to give really specific details on how this all works. So yeah, thank you, and hopefully we'll be in touch soon to kind of provide those more details.